We read in the portion of Mikeitz, Mikeitz shnosayim yomim, and it was at the end of 2 years. Pharaoh cholem, and Pharaoh begins dreaming. V'nei omed al yaor. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh points out that when all the various dream interpreters interpret the dream to Pharaoh, it says, Ein posa osa lePharaoh. Whatever interpretations they offered, he wasn't satisfied with them. But it refers to nobody was able to interpret it for Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the appellation for the king. He had a personal name. Why does Torah make it a point? LeParo, because when a king dreams, cites the Midrash, the dream always has relevance to his kingdom. It's not something on a personal level. So they had said, you'll have 7 daughters will be born, 7 daughters will die. Immediately he knew this is not relevant to him. Of course, as a king, when he dreams, it has to include his whole empire. And this is unrelated to his empire. So when the Torah says, that's what the Or HaChaim HaKadosh as explains it there. So seemingly when it says it was at the end of 2 years, Uparo Cholim. Paro, the king was dreaming. Meaning this dream, the ramifications of this dream has relevance to his kingdom and to the whole world. Especially Egypt being the most advanced civilization, being the most powerful empire at this moment. So Paro is dreaming. Now what is the significance of this particular dream? It has untold ramifications. As we discussed at one time, the Chazal tell us that the wealth that was accumulated of the world, this wealth was the wealth which they had built the Mishkan. That was the wealth. Otherwise, how does Egypt? They believed that all the wealth that was coming to Egypt was for themselves. Little did they know, they were the bankers for Klal Yisrael, that when they would leave after 210 years, they're taking all this gold and silver and everything with them. So Paro, this is touching upon all the totality of existence. The Mishkan, Vasli Migdash Shachanti B'tocham. This is God's dwelling location. So it's Paro Cholem. The Pharaoh was dreaming. But he only began dreaming after 2 years. Why 2 years? So Chazal tell us that because Yosef, after he interpreted, as we'll see in a moment, the dreams of the Saramashkim, the wine steward, he had asked the wine steward to do him a favor, to reciprocate, as he relieved his worry that he would be reinstated as the wine steward, as the minister. So too he should reciprocate, do him a favor, and say, put in a good word to Paro that he's an innocent person, he was victimized, he was stolen from his land, he was kidnapped, and he should be released. And he used 2 words, Uzkartani v'hiskartani. You shall remember me and mention me. For each word that he had said, he had spent an additional year in prison. For each word. So now that the 2 years are up, Vayhi b'keitz shnosayim yomim, literally to the moment, Pharaoh Cholem, Pharaoh starts dreaming. B'nei omed al yor, and he's standing on the Nile. I was thinking, I'd ask the question, Rashi explains why was the Nile called Yor. So he explains, based on the Chazal, that in Egypt doesn't rain. So how are the fields irrigated? The Nile rises, and it goes into the irrigation ditches, these tributaries, and that's how the fields are watered. So I asked, we read later that when Yaakov had come to Egypt, he had given the bracha to Paro that whenever he goes down to the Nile rises. And this is why Paro believed he was a deity. He deified himself, because without water you can't live. And the pasuk refers to the Nile as Paro saying, as if he says, I made the Nile. Because evidently he had believed, deluded himself, but since seemingly whenever he goes to the Nile, it rises. And that's life. This is how the fields are irrigated. But factually, as it says, the Nile was called Yor, because it would rise and irrigate the fields. I said something which is what we call a dochik, a little difficult, that it rose to a greater degree. Before it rose less, and or maybe it only rose initially during high tide. Here, Paro, whenever he goes to the Nile, it rises, regardless of when he goes. So therefore, it's even more than that. So it's interesting. We know that Paro, believing he was a god, he concealed that he had bodily functions as a god. And the whole interaction with Moshe, and Moshe would always meet him in early morning at the Nile doing his bodily functions. Of course, nobody was able to see. The Midrash tells us that because he was such a sorcerer, he was able to conceal himself through a sorcery that nobody visually was able to see him. And he was amazed that Moshe was able to locate him and to expose him despite his dimension of sorcery. So when would he go down to the Nile? He'd go down to the Nile early in the morning. So seemingly, if he's the Paro, so whenever he would go, the Nile would rise. So they knew he was around. He couldn't conceal it, right? Because it would rise at an unusual level whenever he went down there. But I was thinking differently. You know, the Ramchal says in the Derech Hashem that ultimately, when Mashiach will come, it's either the generation will be kuli zakai, they'll all be meritorious, or kuli chayiv, or they will not be deserving. And he will install a king, shekoshik zerosov mihomen arosha. His decrees will be more harsh than Haman, the evil one. And as a result of that, they'll be forced to do tshuva. Meaning without, literally, those all-consuming levels of decree, Klal Yisrael is not doing tshuva. You need that level of suffering for them to do tshuva. But if they're kuli zakai, if they're all meritorious, it's not necessary. So the Ramchal writes that if the Klal Yisrael is on a spiritual level, and they're living properly, and they keep advancing spiritually, so when Mashiach comes, it's just transitioning to a higher level. Because they have an appreciation for that. Now they're yearning for more of that. What happens if Klal Yisrael are in the material mode, in the hedonistic mode? They're devoid of spirituality. That's not their priority. So how do you give the Jew an interest in spirituality? You make things so painful, so difficult, that they believe that the salvation is an impossibility. Things have gone awry to such an extreme level. It's like Klal Yisrael in Egypt. They believed they're forsaken. They despaired from redemption. They didn't think they were coming out. And all of a sudden, in a moment, Yeshua Hashem Keref Ayin, God's salvation comes like a blink of an eye. Identically, for Klal Yisrael to appreciate the Yeshua, God's salvation, things have become so bad that they literally stop believing that there's going to be a salvation. That's what happens. If you read about the famine, the dreams, it says there were 7 healthy, fleshed cows, and then there were 7 emaciated cows. And it says when they swallowed the 7 healthy cows, it wasn't even noticeable. So Rashi cites the Medrash, that the famines will be so severe that despite the dimension of plenty, literally overwhelming plenty, it'll be totally forgotten. It's just like it never was. That's how bad the famine's going to be. They won't even remember the good times. That's how bad it was going to be. Now, there were 7 years of plenty. When did Yaakov come to Egypt? After 2 years of famine. When Yaakov came to Egypt, the famine ceased. That's why they believed Yaakov had some kind of spiritual power. And that's why Yaakov was concerned. They would deify him. I mean, what does an Egyptian understand Yaakov? He understands his dimension of Torah. He understands his quality of Kedusha. But they know, after 2 years, there was no even memory of the plenty. The man comes, he's a miracle worker. Things change all of a sudden. Evidently, he's a holy man. Yaakov says, I'll not sick buried in Mitzrayim. I don't want to be buried in Egypt. Why? Because Shem Yasu Osi Avodah Zorah, they turn him into a deity. He doesn't want to be worshipped. That's one of the reasons why he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. But factually, he gave at that time, after he came, he gave Paro a bracha. That when you go down to the Nile, it will rise. So what happens is, at this point, they were in such a state of suffering, of deprivation, of food and material, that originally arose, the Nile had these tributaries, and high tide would rise. Rashi says it didn't rise any longer. During the years of famine, the fields were not irrigated. That's one of the reasons why there was a famine. Other locations, there was no rain, and the river was so shallow, it didn't rise. All of a sudden, Paro goes down. He's the miracle maker. It starts rising. So it comes out. It's similar. There was no memory of the good years. So therefore, who's the so-called the miracle maker? Paro. Paro is this holy, godly man. I mean, Yaakov, it's true when he first came. But did they know that it was due to Yaakov's bracha? That the reason why when Paro now goes down to the Nile, it rises. So now Paro becomes self-deluded. He believes. So why does he conceal that he has bodily functions? Of course he knew. He didn't think it was misleading. Because he believed that the only way they could appreciate that he's truly a God and not be distracted, he doesn't have bodily functions. Understand? It wasn't that he wanted to fool them. He believed he was a deity. But whoever heard a deity having bodily functions? That means he's like them. So he has to conceal his bodily functions that they should appreciate who truly is, who he believes he really is. This is Paro. This is how self-deluded he was, although everything started from the bracha that Yaakov had given him, that when he goes down, the Nile will rise and water the fields and irrigate the fields. Chazal tell us that Yosef spent 12 years in prison. First he was accused of trying to rape his master's wife, Eshes Potiphar, and then the additional 2 years was Uzkartani Viskartani. Remember me and mention me. Now, what were the 10 years for? So I'd mentioned, so the Maral explains, the Torah tells us that when Moshe came in the 209th year to Egypt and presented his credentials as the Goel, as the Redeemer, he performed the miracles. So the Torah says, Vayamein ha'om, the people believed. So when the people believed, the Medrash tells us, the Maral of Prague brings this, cites this, Miyad poska shivut. The bondage ceased immediately. Immediately. So he goes to explain, why is Vayamein ha'om believing that Moshe is the Goel, is the Redeemer? This is a basis why the bondage should cease at that moment. So he explains, what's the concept of being a slave, being enslaved, especially the type of slavery which Egypt was. A slave is the chattel of its master. That's what a slave is. Body, mind, time, there's no aspect of the slave's life which is not dictated by his master. It's totally dominated, totally controlled. The master dictates and controls and affects the life of the slave. What is the concept of physical existence? Cause and effect. Everything in the world is cause and it's affected. Why do things happen? There's cause and there's effect. So the concept of being influenced, dominated from an external source is a concept that's a physical characteristic. Cause and effect. Not being affected, that's spiritual. Something that's a constant. It's not it's here, then it's gone. But rather, it's something which is continuous. Spirituality is eternal. Now, if the world is a pagan world, why is the world a pagan world? Because everyone believes what everybody else believes. And even if you don't, not clearly you're a pagan, but because of the influences and the beliefs of society, you assume those norms, those beliefs, those values, the ethics, the morals, whatever it is. That is an indication that you're a physical being. What about if the world's a pagan world and the Jews say, we believe in a monotheistic being. We believe in an omnipotent being. We believe there's no such thing as any power other than God. This is contrary, not allowing yourself to be drawn in to the beliefs of the world. We are, Klal Yisrael is an unaffected people, at least when it comes to belief. We are unaffected. And the more unaffected you are, the more spiritual you are. So therefore, when it says, Vayamin Om, they believed that Moshe was God's agent to take them out of Egypt, Miat Poska Shibut. This level of dominance, control, effect ceased. Because they, at that moment, the posture they assumed was a spiritual posture. And as a spiritual being, you cannot be dominated. You are not dominated. It's contrary to the whole reality of what physical is. This is how the Maharal explains it. So to the degree that you're affected, that is the degree which classifies you as a physical being. So he goes to explain the Maharal, the Torah at the end of Moshe's life, the Torah describes Moshe's physical condition, his physical condition. Lo noslecho, lo koseino, he was vibrant, he could see, he was like a young man, although he was 120 years old. The Torah giving us a health update on Moshe Rabbeinu. Why is that important for us to know that lo noslecho, lo koseino, and afilu bekever, as it says in Chazal, even the grave, he did not in any way, he had that same vibrancy in the grave. Why? 120 years of this to tell us Moshe Rabbeinu was a totally unaffected being. No aspect of his life was there the concept of deterioration or physical regression, anything had no relevance to Moshe Rabbeinu. Because there wasn't a moment in his life that he was an affected person. He was not affected by the world. So if you're not affected, you're not subject to the world, to the ways of the world. The degree that you're affected, that's the way you are affected. So that you deteriorate and you decompose. That's what the tzaddikim in the grave, they don't decompose. They age, but decomposition not. Why? Because in life they did not allow themselves to be affected. That's why they were tzaddikim. Right? Noach lodem shelo nivro. It would have been best for man to not be created. Why? Because most people fail. So the tzaddikim. The righteous, you count them on one hand, relatively speaking. They did not allow themselves to be influenced. They are Noach lem shenivra. For them, it's beneficial. In their best interest, they were created. Therefore, in the grave, they don't decompose. But Moshe Rabbeinu was beyond. Not as much as there wasn't a trace of effect of this, because Moshe Rabbeinu was the most perfect person who ever lived. Moshe Rabbeinu, Koren Orponov, his physicality was totally spiritualized. He radiated kedusha, holiness. When Yosef initially his mistress tried to seduce him. The Gemara tells us that initially Yosef was meant to father 12 tribes. He lost 10. How did he lose 10? Because when she tried to seduce him, he was aroused and he lost 10 droplets of semen. So to what degree was he affected? 10 droplets. Each droplet is a year in prison. What's prison? Incarceration. No, people are slaves of the desires, slaves of themselves. Prison, incarceration, that means you're totally controlled. You're not free to do with your life as you choose to do with your life. Because you were affected to that degree, therefore you're in prison for 10 years. But it's interesting. You know what it means? What to lose a droplet? Ephraim Menashe. Yisimcha Elokim ki Ephraim Menashe. You know what kind of bracha that is? All Klal Yisrael, we bless our children with Ephraim Menashe. These are the children of Yosef. If he would have had another 10 children like this, you know what kind of Klal Yisrael there would have been? So losing a droplet, what was the value of that droplet? I mean, it's something not to be fathomed what it was. So Yosef being in prison, being limited, we're talking about, he's being overly punished. Chas v'sholom. But again, because to the degree that you're affected and you're influenced, to that degree you're compromised. That was his compromise. Uzchartani v'skartani. He shouldn't have asked the Egyptian to do him the favor. He should have had bitochim. He should have had faith in God, trust in God. So to what degree did his situation cause him to fail? to become desperate. 2 words. For each word. He was affected that he made a request by expressing 2 words. Remember me, mention me. To that degree, he spent another 2 years in incarceration. But once the 12 years were up, immediately, Paro begins dreaming now. We discussed that Rachel was one of the most beautiful women who ever lived. Yosef was the most handsome man who ever lived in the existence of the world. And Yosef is Yosef HaTzadik. And we said that, the Gemara says that Ein Zaro Shel Esav Nofel Lo Biyad Zaro Shel Rachel. That the progeny of Esav fall in the hands of the progeny of Rachel. So it's not Yosef's his ability. That we said that Yosef is the Lahova. That he goes out and he consumes Esav. Right? Esav, base Esav Lakash, he's the straw which is consumed by the flame. This power emanates from who? From Rachel Imenu. Now, how does that emanate? So we explained that Rachel Imenu, as much as she was this physical being, this representation of unusual Yofi, beauty, she consecrated and dedicated, fully invested in Avodas Hashem, serving God. She sanctified it. What does that mean? She took full control. It did not allow her to be affected, but she dominated it. And since Esav represents the material world, the physical world, as she was able to fully dominate and dedicate her being to serve Hashem, to subjugate it, she's able to subjugate Edom. Identically, Yosef, being this epitome of beauty, he inherited this from his mother. That he has the ability to dominate and control and subjugate the material and dictate the material. Yosef is sold into slavery. He's in the house of Potiphar, Sarah Tabochim, the minister of either he was the chief executioner or he was the chief meat purveyor of Egypt. He's there a short time. There's nothing in his life, Potiphar, that he has any interest in other than his wife. Who's overseeing his whole financial enterprise? Yosef. How do you go from nothing all of a sudden? Rises immediately to the top, dictates, controls. He's imprisoned, he becomes the warden of the prison. Everything in the prison is only based on what he dictates, what he determines. There's no situation where Yosef is dominated. He may be confined, but even in the confined context, he controls, he dominates. He finally comes out of prison. Within a moment, he has a meteoric rise. He becomes the viceroy of Egypt. And Paro says to Yosef, Braka kise eglo mimeko. Only the throne. I'm called king. Outside of that, you're empowered. What does that mean? You know what that meant? What power, what wealth is, and what this was? He rose to the top. Because again, he has the ability to dominate and dictate and subjugate the physical. Paro knew 70 languages. Yosef knew 71 languages. One beyond. And Paro knew that he bested him in this thing, in this area. That's why he never ever, when he wanted to bury his father in Egypt, he says, well, violate your oath. He says, I'll violate my oath. If my oath to you my oath to my father is no longer in effect, my oath to you is no longer in effect. Paro kept quiet. He let him take Yaakov out of Egypt for that reason. But it's always to the very top. That's Yosef. So after he spent these 12 years, Yosef was never ever again dominated. Nobody dictated, nobody controlled him. He was always on the very top. Always on the very top. So the lahava, which is consuming, destroying, that only pertains to Esav. Because there's a tension. Esav wants to control. He doesn't want to be subjugated. So what happens if you don't want to be subjugated? As he said in the vernacular, when push comes to shove, who wins out? The lahava. The flame consumes the straw. That's Beis Yosef is lahava. Beis Esav is kash, it's straw, it destroys it. But here there's no opposition to Yosef in Egypt. He's given full control, do as you choose. That's Yosef. We find that Yosef, when he was in the house of Potiphar, it says that the reason why his mistress noticed him, and they show him a salsa basaro, he was beautifying himself. It says, Vayochal vayesht, he ate, he drank, and he started to beautify himself. What's this beautification? Yosef is such a tzaddik. We're talking about he wants to somehow perfect his physical beauty. He coiffured his hair, his eyelashes, his eyebrows. What's this all about? What about if a person, his role in life is to be a representation of Kedusha? That the only value of the material, even at the most advanced level, its value is only to be consecrated. So let's say a person looks like a malnourished, shabby, threadbare beggar. Although he has the potential to look as the most beautiful person in the world, and has the greatest presence, but it's totally concealed, then you're doing a disservice. That's why Yosef was Masalso Basaro. That's why he wanted to be coiffured. Now that he's in the position that he's rising, let people understand what his level of representation is. It's over there, what it says over there. How did Potiphar know that Hashem is Imo? God is with him. He saw this tremendous success. He knew God was with him. So Rashi says, Shem Hashem Shogeh B'fiv. Because the name of God was always continuously in the mouth of Yosef. There was no ifs or buts. Who am I? What am I? What's the basis? What's the secret of my success? My connection to the source. Shem Hashem Shogeh B'fiv. It couldn't be denied. He wasn't intimidated in any way by anyone. But how do I'm a slave by a pagan. Pagan, who knows? I'm at his mercy. Yosef wasn't at anybody's mercy. You're only at the mercy of God. That's Yosef. And he sees this level of success. It's a beautiful word from the Kliyoke here. Regarding the dream, it says, Hinim in your olos sheva poros. 7 cows, beautiful looking, healthy fleshed, and they're grazing in the marshes. When it speaks about the emaciated cows, it speaks about acheros, 7 other cows. It could have said, Vinisheva Paros, Olas Achreim. What is the Acheros? The Acher. Others. Then it says regarding the second dream, there was sheaves. 7 sheaves on one stalk. Then it says regarding the wind-blown sheaves that grew afterwards, Sheva Shibolim Dakos Tufas Kodem Tzomchos Achrehen. After them. So he goes to show that when is the best time? When there's unity among people. People, they're unified, nobody's envious of anyone else. That's unity. When is the unity? When there's plenty. When there's more than enough to go around. People are happy for one another. That's the fos mare. When do you have fractionalization in society? That's achrein, acher. Everyone is a stranger to the other one. That's you, this is me. There's no basis for the cohesiveness of society. That's achrein. And so therefore Yosef immediately knew that what does that represent? That there's such an extreme level of fractionalization and individualism that each person's only out for himself. That's an indication that this is the most extreme level of famine. Finally, he summons all his sorcerers, his dream interpreters. No one's able to interpret the dream. Finally, Saramashkim, he speaks up. Eschatoy ani masker hayom. My sins I mentioned today. Firstly, why sins? There was one sin. He failed because Paro found a splinter or a stone in the bread. It's one sin. It's not sins. So either he says that when you sin against the king, even one sin is the equivalent of multiple because of the graveness of the failing, so it's the equivalent of many. Or that he even mentions that he once failed to the king, that itself is a sin. You think the king wants to hear that you had failed him in the past? That itself is a sin. Besides this, the sin, even mentioning the sin. But he says, I have no choice. That's what the wine steward says, I have no choice. Because he tells over the story, how he had the dream. V'shami tanu. Nar ivri eved l'sar tabochim. There with us, there was Nar Ivri, a Hebrew lad, the slave of the minister of Tabochim. So, it's a Medrash Tanchuma. Nar Eved Ivri. What would the depiction, what adjectives did he use to describe Yosef? Firstly, how did the Sarah Mashkim understand what Yosef's ability was? Was he a savant? And he had ability to interpret dreams? Evidently, he was running the prison. So, the Sarah Mashkim knew he was more than just a savant. That he had this special ability to interpret dreams. Rameir Simcha explains he spent a year with these people in prison. These people were ministers. Normally a person, if he wants to become a diplomat, you have to go to diplomat school to learn all the ways of diplomacy. Yosef was the valet for a year's time. He saw the ins and the outs of all political, and he watched them and he viewed them. So Yosef being groomed to be the viceroy, it doesn't come out of thin air. He had a year's level of what? Of mentoring by being exposed to these people. That was part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's cheshbon, his calculation, why he was with them for a year. And finally, at the end, he interprets their dreams. So they saw what his capability was. I mean, is there even a consideration to say that he's a fool? He's an illiterate. He's this, whatever he may be. Arurim harishom shein tovosam shleimo. Maskir b'loshen bizoyan. Cursed are the evil, that even when they do good, they cannot do it completely. Because he mentions them in the most disgraceful, pejorative context. Nar shote. He's unstable. Ve'roy l'gdula. Therefore, he's not worthy to be to any level of greatness. Ivri comes from the other side of the river. Afilu shonene in a makir. He doesn't even understand our language. So seemingly, when he came before Paro, Paro had an interpreter there. He didn't speak directly to the Pharaoh. He had an interpreter. Because if Paro would have heard how well he spoke Egyptian, he spoke the king's Egyptian over here. Right? With the dialect that the king probably spoke. So by saying that, Paro won't know the difference. Unstable, you don't know he's Eved. He's a slave. Uchsiv bin Nemuse Mitzrayim, and it's written in the protocols of Egypt, Shein Eved Molech, a slave cannot assume any position of what? Of control, of kingship. Well, Love speak they saw him, he's not permitted to wear minister's attire. So before he tells him that he has the ability to interpret dreams, he gives him a understanding of what he is. But he interpreted our dreams. So I asked the question in the past. I mean, seemingly any responsible person would act the way the Sarah Mashkim acted. The Sarah Mashkin wants to 2 years earlier, prior to this moment. Yosef goes and asks him to mention him, to remember and mention him. It says, Vayishkochehu. He forgot about him because he's an evil man. If Yosef comes out of prison and rises to power, what do you think is going to happen to Sarah Mashkin's life? We'll have him executed. So he wants to do whatever he can. We're talking about self-preservation here. Keep him at bay. So by depicting him in the most negative, pejorative, incompetent context, there's no way he's rising to power. So if that's the case, why is there Arurim Rishoyim? Why are Rishoyim, the evil, accursed, even when they do good, they can't do good in a complete way? He's behaving responsibly. He did the wrong thing. But now it's just a question of surviving. Not to say this, and we say the first impressions are the greatest impressions. Let him think let Paro think the way I present it. Put him in that profile. But Chazal said no, Arurim Rishoyim. When an evil person sees a person who's a true tzaddik, the Nazis, Yimach Shemam V'Zichram, who epitomized and personified evil, when they would see a holy tzaddik, and they would take him, they would beat him to death. And they would pull his beard out of his face, and they would beat him, and they would starve him, and they would mock him and laugh, and finally take him to the gallows and make a mockery of his life. How could they not see the holiness and the specialness and the purity of this man? You know what the answer is? Because they're evil. They're Rishoyim. A person who's evil cannot appreciate, has no capacity to evaluate what this reality is. Because they're Rishoyim, therefore they can't. You spend Yosef. Yosef was Ben Zukunim. He looked exactly like his father. You don't think Yosef gave off a holiness, a refinement? You know how refined he was, Yosef. His purity of being. Could a man of this caliber, could he take revenge? Would he take revenge? He's a man who was known, he only spoke the word of God. Regardless of what his position was, he was a man of faith. Totally. So if that's the case, whatever happened to him, that you didn't remember him, do you think he's going to bear a grudge? The reason why he was there, because God wanted him to be there. But how did the Sarah Mashkim process that? Went right over his head. He glossed right over it. Why did he gloss over it? Because he was a Russia. Because he was evil like the Nazi, Yemach Shemo V'Zichro. Could not appreciate what a Jew was, a tzaddik was, a holy person, regardless of how holy he was. Didn't have the capacity. This man, although he spent a year with Yosef, on a very personal level, all he saw was, he interpreted my dream. I survived the minister of baking, he was hanged. That's the only thing that he drew from this. But who he is, he's a savant, he's unstable, he doesn't speak our language. He didn't pay attention to him. His arrogance, his evil, everything about him. Didn't even notice Yosef for what he was. Arurim Rishoyim, even when they do something good, Ein Tovosum Shlema, they can't do it. They can't do it completely. That's the reason. What Yosef did afterwards, I don't know what he did with it, with the Sarah Mashkim. But definitely, if there was no reason to remove him, he wouldn't have removed him. Vayishlach Paro v'yikra el Yosef. Immediately Paro sends and he calls Yosef, v'yiritzim in a bor. They rush him out of the pit, out of the dungeon. V'yigalach v'yichalif shemosov. They shave him. They give him a change of clothing. V'yovel Paro. He comes to Paro. So the Sefarno says something interesting here. Kederach kol tshuas Hashem, shenasis kvo rega. Whenever there's a salvation, it happens in a moment. And he gives examples. In a moment. Here he's at the depth, the abyss of slavery, and in a moment he's taken to a level which is not to be understood. Kamra kikrovi yeshua lovo. My Yeshua, my salvation is close to happen. Chomrlo ami shomeali kimat oivei machnia. In a moment, I will subjugate their enemies. Kachoye inyan Mitzrayim. That's what with Egypt. Kaomro ki gorshu Mitzrayim. We're driven out. We will believe the day we will be driven out. Kaomro zao shlo hisbik b'tzeikot shel v'sein lahachmitz. The dough didn't have a chance to ferment, to become leavened. Chen omar lasos losit. This is what's going to happen in the time. Kaomro upisom yovo hecholo adom. Suddenly, he will come to his sanctuary, the master. Hashem will appear suddenly, out of nowhere. Everything has to happen in a moment. It's interesting. Now, this whole concept of kitrug. The moment Satan finds out that something is going to happen, and the benefit of Klal Yisrael on a spiritual level, immediately there's a level of prosecution. The Gemara tells us in Shabbos, Tamei Kabbalah Torah, Satan was looking for Moshe Rabbeinu, couldn't find him. Was looking, wanted to know what's going on. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't know what's going on. Where's the Torah? Where's this? Moshe Rabbeinu evaded him continuously. Satan wanted to know. And he played the game he doesn't know. Find by the Akedah, the Ayil was caught in the thicket. Yechezkiel was supposed to be Mashiach. Midas Adin came with a claim. He's not worthy. There's always something. The whole story with Tamar and Yehuda, they ask. I mean, whenever we speak about Mashiach is going to come from this union. Is that the way? Yehuda being this Malchus, this royalty. She poses as a prostitute, and she conceives from him and has twins. And this is ultimately saw Boaz and Rus, the grandmother of David HaMelech, out in the field by the threshing floor. So the way it's explained, I think it's attributed to the Shach, that he says that Satan's not going to allow this conception to come about. This is Mashiach. Mashiach comes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to destroy the Malcham Avos, the angel of death, and all that comes to an end. In the worst way, he doesn't want that to happen. He will prevent this union in the worst way from taking place. So what does Hashem do? He allows it to happen in a context which is tainted with semi-sin. It's soiled. The moment he sees that, he lets it go right under the wire. That's that. But what about when the Yeshua comes? It's terrifying. In a moment. Happens in a moment. At the end of time, upisam yovel heicholu odom. Son's not going to have a word to say. It's too late. By the time he wakes up, it's too late. The whole idea, we say, that we blow the extra tkiyus on Rosh Hashanah is l'arvivis Satan, to confuse Satan. All of a sudden he has the shofar. He thinks this is, you talk about shofar gadol. This is the great shofar, he's going to be destroyed. You understand? He didn't know it was coming. Because he knows he's looking out for this every moment. You understand? Satan is looking for this every moment. Because he knows it's going to happen and it's going to be sprung on him. So he's waiting. All of a sudden he hears it. He's overwhelmed. He's confused. He's so confused he can't even prosecute because of that. I was just thinking, a person has to await the coming Mashiach. It's not enough, I believe in his coming. You have to await his coming. As they say, the Chofetz Chaim, he'd have a packed bag, and he's ready to go. Not only every day he would go to the window many times, look down the street to see if Mashiach was coming. What's this anticipation? This is literally, that's Mida connected Mida. As the Satan every moment is waiting, because he's not going to be alerted, we're not going to be alerted either. It's going to be sprung on us, the Mashiach. So the way he waits, if we wait that way, it's going to happen in that way. It's not we have to prepare for it. We have to wait his coming. The way the Satan awaits his coming to be mekatreg, to prosecute, chas v'sholem. Therefore, it's sudden. Yosef's being rushed out of the pit. What was the value of that? This is preparing Klaus for Kabbalah Satorah. Yosef, when he named his son Menashe, why did he name his son Menashe? Ki nashane Elokim mikol amoli. Hashem allowed me to forget all the angst and the suffering of my household, my brothers. Because if he would have had any of that negative feeling, he couldn't have been dedicated as he was meant to be dedicated. Klaus would have never evolved in Egypt. To leave after 210 years. To become the Am Hashem. So if Sodom would be alerted he's coming out of the dungeon, he wouldn't have allowed it. In a certain way, the Saramashkim is no better than Sodom. No, he tried to clip the wings. He tried to minimize Yosef. If he would have been minimized, he would never become viceroy. He would never become viceroy. It wouldn't have happened. He's rushed suddenly. And he caused him to be rushed. But he's trying to put a lid on him. Told him back, to put him in shackles. Doesn't work. It's interesting. We find, a person does a person a favor. Do him a favor, say, but remember me, you owe it to me. Is that the way you talk? These Jews are so aggressive. They do something for you, right away they want a guarantee on the payback. You understand? Chas v'sholom. Yosef, after he interprets the dream of the Saramashkim, he says, Kim zachartani yitcho kasher tavloch. Remember me as will be good will be done to you. V'sisono imodi chosed, yeah. Because I did good with you, do good with me. Person says, is that the way you ask for good? It's almost insulting. Yosef understood. Because of the nature of this type of person, Saramashkim, unless you get in a word edgewise, your history, you'll be forgotten totally. Even with it says Vayishkachei, we forgot about him. But Yosef understood. Unless I demand what's rightfully mine, I'm not getting it. Yosef automatically, he interprets the dreams, and right away he's giving advice how to deal with it. You understand? Because if he would have just interpreted the dream, he's the savant. But if he immediately begins giving him understanding how to deal with it, how to save the civilization, how to save the world, he's amazed. He never saw such genius in his world, in his life. And what does he say to his advisors? He says to them, this goes beyond human genius. This is the Spirit of God is in the man. This is the pagan of pagans, the king of Egypt. Have you ever seen one? Why? Because Yosef all along was saying, Elokim yanesh shlom paro. Elokim will answer, bring peace to Paro. It's not me. I'm just the conduit. So in terms of wisdom, being able in a moment to tell him how to deal with the issue, this is beyond. This is godliness. And what does he say? V'yomer Paro el Yosef, Achri hodia lokim oscho. After God informed you, as calls all this, a novel v'chocha. That's a confirmation. There's no one who's more insightful and wiser than you are. Why? Because God informed you. That means there's no one wiser than you. So evidently, it's simple. You would say that if he gave him the understanding how to deal with the famine, evidently he's the one who's in the position to be able to do it. I mean, he has the capacity. Right? Or you could say even more than that, which the Gemara tells us. It says, "Leiv kol chacham leiv nosan chochma." When it came to the Mishkan, all the artisans, these people their background was mortar and brick. All of a sudden, they're the most sophisticated artisans: goldsmiths, weavers, dyers, cabinet makers, everything. In the heart where there was wisdom. So which heart does God give wisdom? The heart that already has wisdom. So God is only associated with a person who has this exceptional level of wisdom. After God informed you, all this, that clears the confirmation, there's no one more insightful and wiser than you are. Otherwise, you wouldn't be the receptacle, you wouldn't have the capacity to contain all this wisdom. This is the reason. Said that the good-looking cows, Rashi says, that was a sign of Yemei Sova, the years of plenty. So what is Sova? That people are not envious of one another. They have a good eye to one another. So Rashi brings the Chazal. Simnul Meisova Shabrios Niros Yofuzuluzu. They treat each other well. Shein Ayin Brio Tzor B'Chaverta. No one's eye is looking at his fellow. Is limited. There's a broadness. I'm more than happy that you're succeeding. Because everybody has so much. So what I said was, the Gemara tells us that we read in the Tochacha that if we go in the way of Hashem, the Heisir Hashem b'cho kol choli, God will remove all illness from us. This is the curses. But if you go in the way of Hashem, God will remove all curses from us. Omar Rav zu ayin hara. What does it mean to remove the curses from us? He will not allow us to be susceptible to evil eye. There will not be ayin hara. So it says Rav is consistent with his own understanding, because Rav went to a cemetery and he looked at the people at the graves and he said 99.9% of the people here, they all died of ayin hara, of the evil eye. So v'heser Hashem kol choli, Hashem will remove kol choli, all illness. It means you will not have ayin hara. Person dies of a heart attack, cancer, stroke, leukemia. What relevance does that to ayin hara? You know, he gave him an iron, he zapped him, he turned into a heap of ash or dust. But this is illness. What does illness have to do with this? So the way I understand it is this: the way Hashem created a human being, why is a person not susceptible? There's so much bacteria, so much illness in the world. Why are we affected by it? Because a person has an immune system. And the immune system doesn't allow the person to be breached. That's how powerful. What happens if that immune system is compromised? Then chas v'sholom, God forbid, it infiltrates and a person is susceptible to whatever's around him. Now, what breaches and compromises the immune system of a human being? Ayin hara, the evil eye. The evil eye has the ability to compromise another person's immune system, to compromise it. As a result of that, 99% of people in the cemetery die as a result of, of course, it was the various illnesses or the mishaps. But why were they vulnerable to those mishaps or illnesses? Because the Heser Hashem kol choli, Hashem will remove the illness. As a result of that, you will not be susceptible to anything. So what is the beauty of Yofos, Brios Boser? Habrios Yofos Zem Zeh. Shein ayin bria tzar b'chaverta. One person's eye is not limited regarding his fellow. That's what it is. So what I said was, today, something interesting says, so if a person actually gives another person ayin hara, even unintentional, the person has a degree of envy or pain because somebody has something that he doesn't have. You don't know how that could affect that other person. But let's say the other person is affected negatively. We say that Grumba v'nizoken is potter. A person indirect cause causes another person a financial loss or any loss, you're absolved. That's only in court. But in the heavenly court, there's liability. You have to compensate the person. B'dei shemayim chayiv. You're liable. So if that's the case, if a person through his ayin hara caused another person to become ill, or have financial loss. That means that there's liability. So if there's liability, the person has to be punished. Because Adam Mu'ud L'Olam. A damager is liable, whether it's deliberate, inadvertent, something beyond. If you're the cause of that, there's liability to the damager. So Ayin Hara, which is almost, everybody has some degree of relevance to it, there's tremendous liability. So how do we understand Ezo Osher HaSamech B'Chelko? A person who's truly satisfied with his lot, there's not an iota of that negative feeling. So if there's no iota, therefore you're truly an Osher. Whatever you're given is going to remain with you. There's no payouts. You don't have to make any payouts. But what do you need that to retain the wealth that God gives you? You have to be Samech B'Chelko. Because if you're Samech B'Chelko, then they won't have this peripheral damage. You're not going to have it. But it's again, when there's wealth, there's plenty, then there's no Ayin Hara. V'hei Sir Hashem Kocholi. God will remove the illness. There will not be Ayin Hara. People will be satisfied with what they have, and therefore people will be looking at themselves, not at their fellows.